Good afternoon, Africa. My name is Innocent Semosa. In for Tamingo Beni, this is Africa in Business. A very big thank you to the Upside. They're back with you tomorrow. But first, let's check up what's happening in the world of news.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Eno. Looking at your top stories, Guinea-Bissau junta releases opposition leader and vows inclusive government, and Pakistan launches its first polio nationwide campaign. Your latest news. Greetings to our listeners. The junta that seized power in Guinea-Bissau in a coup in November last year has vowed to bring the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde into government. The PAIGC has also released its leader, former Prime Minister Domingos Pereira, who has been under house arrest since the coup last year. Army officers in Guinea-Bissau, branding themselves as the military high command, toppled the President Umaro Sissoco Embalo on the 26th of November and installed Major General Hota Instaas as interim president following day. The moves are an apparent attempt to appease the West African regional bloc ECOWAS, which has suspended Guinea-Bissau and demanded a quick transition to civilian rule. Last month, a presidential decree scheduled new presidential and legislative elections for the 6th of December. The National Commission of Correctional Services, Mokgotsi Tobakhale, has revealed that South Africa's inmate population has risen to over 170,000, far exceeding the department's approved bed capacity. Tobakhale was speaking during a media briefing in Pretoria on the outcome of the department's festive season security operations. He also provided an update on investigations into security-related incidents in the Western Cape province. Tobakhale says the situation has placed enormous pressure on staffing and security during the festive season security operations, leading to overcrowding.
During the festive season, the inmate population exceeded 739,000, far surpassing the department's approved capacity of approximately 167 beds. This level of incarceration represents the highest population recorded in recent years and has placed immense pressure on infrastructure, staffing, security management, budget, and it's also compounded by reduced court activity during the festive season.
A South African woman from George in the Western Cape province, whose daughter is imprisoned in Thailand, has started a campaign to assist South Africans and others who fell victim to job scams in that country. They were trafficked from Thailand to Myanmar and escaped following police and military raids on the compounds they worked at. Lynn Bilgnot moved to Thailand to be closer to her daughter Ashley Oosthuizen, who was imprisoned on drug charges in 2020. She is currently assisting 10 people, including 4 South Africans.
They all come from poor backgrounds. Their only crime was to hope for a better opportunity to provide for their families. Many survivors were initially helped by NGOs, but I've been informed that those funds have now run out. The reason why some remain stranded and why I decided to finally launch a Back a Buddy campaign called Let's Bring Them Home. Right now, at least 10 people urgently need funding for flight tickets to return home safely.
Pakistan has launched its first nationwide campaign of the year to vaccinate more than 45 million children against polio. For the next week, health workers will be going door to door to inoculate children in a few provinces. The BBC's Anbarasan Etirajan.
Polio is a highly infectious virus which invades the nervous system and can cause total paralysis. It mainly affects children under 5. Pakistan has been making a sustained vaccination drive, recording 31 polio cases last year compared with 74 a year earlier. Thousands of police officers will provide security to the health workers. They have previously been attacked by militants who falsely claim the vaccination program is a Western conspiracy to sterilize Muslims.
Lastly, U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to sue Trevor Noah over comments the South African comedian made while hosting the Grammy Awards in Los Angeles last night. Trump posted on Truth Social in reference to a comment Noah made after Billie Eilish won the Grammy for Song of the Year. Sharon Bryce-Peace reports.
Noah quipped that the Song of the Year Grammy was the one every artist wanted, almost as much as Trump wanted Greenland, which he then said made sense because Jeffrey Epstein's island was gone and that Trump needed a new one to hang out with Bill Clinton. The Justice Department has released millions of files related to the dead financier who died by suicide in jail in 2019. Both Trump and Clinton appear in the files but have denied wrongdoing. Trump called the Grammys the worst and virtually unwatchable, adding that he'd never been to Epstein's island, accusing Noah of making a defamatory statement, and warning that he'd send his lawyers to sue the comedian whom he referred to as a poor, pathetic, talentless dope of an MC.
Now, recapping on your top stories, the junta that seized power in Guinea-Bissau in a coup in November last year has vowed to bring the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde into government. The PARGC has also released its leader, the former Prime Minister Domingos Pereira, who has been under house arrest since the coup last year. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Tsinsi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, the latest from the transfer window out in England, while the African Beach Soccer Union details the state of its finances. Details of these and other stories coming up at 4:30.
Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Tami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy. Business, trade, and investment opportunities that put the continent first. Africa in Business with Tami Ngubeni.
Good afternoon once again. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm Innocent Semosa, standing in for Tami Ngubeni, and welcome to Africa in Business on Channel Africa, the African Perspective. Coming up this hour, the African Credit Rating Association weighs in on the Afreximbank and Fitch spat. And South Africa's manufacturing PMI shows signs of rebound. You can also follow the conversation by finding us on X at Channel Africa #1, on Facebook at Channel Africa, on Instagram at Channel Africa 1. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at Channel Africa 1. It's exactly 16:08 Central African Time.
Across Africa, communities rise with the promise of clean water and clean sanitation. The African Union's 2026 theme calls us to action.
It's about mobilizing real commitments, securing climate-resilient water and sanitation projects, and ensuring that water becomes a driver of sustainable development and prosperity across the continent.
A landmark moment, not only for Africa, but for the global movement for access to safe water for all.
Assuring sustainable water availability for every home, every village, every nation. This is the Africa we want.
Channel Africa, the African Perspective.
Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Tami Ngubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
All right, let's look at this story now. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has renowned calls for accelerated infrastructure investment across the continent, saying it is key to economic growth, inclusive development, and Africa's long-term resilience. Now, the president was speaking during a virtual meeting of heads of state and government at the Presidential Infrastructure Champion Initiative. Ramaphosa also highlighted infrastructure as a critical enabler of continental integration under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, that Africa could double its GDP by 2040 if infrastructure spending is scaled up. Channel Africa's reporter Michael Mbewe has the details.
The Presidential Infrastructure Champion Initiative was born out of a proposal by former South African President Jacob Zuma to accelerate regional infrastructure development enabled through the political championing of projects. This proposal was made during the 23rd Heads of State and Government Orientation Committee meeting in Kampala, Uganda in July 2010. The role of the champions is to bring visibility and block bottlenecks, coordinate resource mobilization, and ensure project implementation. It presents the opportunity for African heads of state and government to be actively involved in the development and implementation of projects. The projects cover 4 infrastructure sectors, namely transport, energy, ICT, and transboundary water. Current PCI Chair Cyril Ramaphosa said infrastructure development is a vehicle towards economic growth.
As we all know, infrastructure is a catalyst for economic growth, and in many ways it drives inclusive development. It enables access by our people to markets, to improving our essential services, and to engendering economic opportunities. By prioritizing infrastructure development, we are laying the groundwork for long-term economic resilience and progress. But we are also doing something most wonderful, which is continental integration through the African Continental Free Trade Area. A report last year from the OECD and the African Union Commission said that Africa could double its GDP by 2040, but only if countries are able to scale up their infrastructure investment.
Ramaphosa says Africa needs between 130 and 170 billion US dollars annually to close its infrastructure funding gap, urging governments to lead investment efforts alongside development partners, while noting that despite fiscal and geopolitical challenges, key infrastructure projects across the continent continue to show strong resilience and progress.
It is estimated that between $130 billion and $170 billion is actually required on an annual basis to close the infrastructure funding gap on our continent. The report further notes that governments account for 41% of our continent's infrastructure spend. This makes governments key in escalating investment alongside bilateral and multilateral development partners who should be working with us. It is pleasing that despite fiscal constraints and challenges that many countries face, as well as the geopolitical shifts that we see unfolding in the world, our projects have seen remarkable resilience. They've seen unbelievable progress.
He highlighted some of the infrastructure projects that are advancing, with the Trans-Sahara Highway nearly complete, cross-border fiber links operational, and renewed momentum and investment interest in major transport and energy corridors.
The Trans-Sahara Highway, for example, is now more than 90% complete. This brings us closer to the vision of a fully integrated 10,000-kilometer African Unity Road. The Algerian segment of the fiber optic link between Nigeria and Algeria is now operational. We welcome the ongoing work to eliminate roaming charges in the East African community through the Smart Africa initiative under Rwanda's leadership. This is a model we hope to replicate across the continent. We note also the renewed political momentum for the Trans-Sahara gas pipeline and the Abidjan-Lagos corridor, mobilizing more than $15 billion in investment interest.
He called for stronger protection of major infrastructure projects from political instability, highlighting South Africa's growing local locomotive production, urging countries to embed such projects in national law to ensure long-term continuity.
South African factories are now producing locomotives with over 70% local content, proving that Africa can build locomotives for Africa. We will shortly be going into greater detail on these and other projects under the PC portfolio. We must remain vigilant. Political instability in some regions has stalled and in some cases even stopped critical projects. We must use our collective influence to shield these projects from political cycles and ensure that they are incorporated into national legislation for the sake of continuity. These projects need to be properly protected and insulated for posterity.
Michael Mbewe, Channel Africa News, Johannesburg.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
On to this story now. Fitch Ratings has downgraded Afreximbank to junk status, citing Ghana's debt restructuring and losses linked to a $750 million loan as factors that have heightened the bank's risk profile. Now, following the downgrade, Fitch also withdrew Afreximbank's future ratings, bringing to an end what it described as a strained relationship with the African Trade Finance Institution. Meanwhile, the African Credit Rating Association, ACRA, has backed Afreximbank's decision to terminate its relationship with Fitch. For more on this, we're now joined on the line by Dr. Sefiso Falala, the president of the newly formed African Credit Rating Association. Dr. Falala, good afternoon to you and welcome to Channel Africa.
Good afternoon, Innocent. Thank you so much for having us.
Indeed. Thank you so very much for making the time. What is your take on Fitch's decision to downgrade Afreximbank's junk status?
Well, the optics don't look good. I think one needs to have more insight into what actually transpired, because we see that Afreximbank decided to actually do away with the relationship that they had with Fitch prior to the downgrade. And I think this is where it becomes a bit messy, because had the relationship still persisted, then we might have seen a totally different outcome. I think many observers in financial institutions would be having question marks about the sequence of events.
Dr. Falala, being in support of or backed Afreximbank's decision to terminate its decision or this relationship with Fitch, are you saying the concerns raised by the rating agencies, such as elevated credit risk, weak risk management policies, and uncertainty over how the bank handles stress situations involving sovereign borrowers, are not justified in your view?
Yeah, Innocent is a very complex dynamic, and the sequence of events is very important, because it's difficult for us to say that we are backing Afreximbank in its decision, because there are many factors that led to that. But what's important to note is that the decision to terminate the relationship seems to have preceded the actual rating. The rating came as an echo to that decision, and this is where it does seem a bit untidy. And what's important, and what we've been saying as a credit association that is based in the continent, is that there are many factors at play. And one of the reasons that could have accounted for the decision made by Fitch to downgrade could have been the fact that the traditional agencies tend to have a kind of Wall Street balance model when they look at their ratings and calculate the risk therein. Whereas, in fact, when you look at Afreximbank, it is a multilateral structured type of institution, which is backed by many governments across the continent, but also has deposits in the excess of $7 billion from financial institutions and from markets. So the complexity of the bank is such that it's very difficult to understand why, for instance, if you look at the Chinese rating agency that currently rates Afreximbank at AAA, which is a very lucrative and attractive rating, and the Japanese JCR rating agency, which also rates Afreximbank at AA-, and Moody's, which is similar in nature and outlook to Fitch, rating them also at investment grade. And then if you take into account the fact that there has been a breakdown in the relationship and communication between Fitch Ratings and Afreximbank, then you just wonder how much information Fitch Ratings have to actually base their decision on, especially given that comparable organizations differ very strongly in their perspective and outlook to Fitch ratings.
Indeed. And Dr. Falala, Fitch says it has withdrawn all future ratings due to a strained relationship. As an association, aren't you worried about the implications of Fitch ending its rating coverage of AfriCenBank? And I'm asking this because you and I had a chat about this during the launch of Accra, that part of the work that you must do is to really give a correct assessment of what's happening on the ground. Aren't you worried about the implications of Fitch ending its rating coverage?
I think it works both ways. It's worrying for Fitch, definitely. And Fitch did ring the bell. And as they say in markets, once you have rung the bell, you cannot unring it. And markets have moved on the back of that rating, and the dialogue and the conversations around AfriCenBank have changed. The investors have noted this. So the dialogue shifts, and Fitch themselves would be worried about the implications on their own reputation. But certainly, if you look at the South cooperation that is emerging now, the Western markets are no longer the only source of capital and funding. And we are seeing a rise, for instance, in funding from the New Development Bank under the auspices of the BRICS nations, and Asian finance also coming to help African countries finance imports and exports and development of industrial output. So the actual assessment of risk on the African continent is changing, and Fitch is no longer one of the major players by virtue of withdrawing their ratings and exiting. And in fact, the growth of Eastern Asian markets is very significant in this case, particularly seeing as their ratings differ markedly from the ratings that are issued by Fitch. So this action is more likely to have a bigger impact, certainly in Africa, on Fitch itself than it would on African market and multilateral institutions such as AfriCenBank.
Dr. Falala, it's going to be interesting to see how the other rating agencies deal with with Africa's unique developmental agenda, and it's going to be interesting again to see how these methodologies fall short. But thank you so indeed for making the time, and have a great afternoon ahead.
Appreciate it, Innocent. Thank you for having us.
Dr. Sifiso Falala, the president of African Credit Rating Association.
Conversations are happening, and Channel Africa is at the heart of them. We tell the African story with clarity, pride, and purpose, reaching audiences that matter to your brand. Partner with us and connect your business with listeners across borders in multiple languages and markets. For partnership opportunities, sponsorship, or sales, email us at partnership@channelafrica.co.za. Channel Africa, the African perspective. We are on Open Views Audio Bouquet. Channel 628.
All right, now concerns are arising that a proposed 50% tariff on cars imported from China and India could push the price of South Africa's most affordable vehicles up by around $2,500. That's 40,000. Now, Makle Keita, CEO of the Motor Industry Staff Association, warns it may be too late in the game now to impose such tariffs. Given the jobs supported by the scale of these imports, early in 2026, 19 of South African 20 cheapest passenger cars were imported from China or India, with the only exception being the Kia Picanto from South Korea. For more on this, we're now joined on the line by the Chief Marketing Officer at car.coza, Nicole Austin. Austin, thank you so much for making the time, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Innocent.
Indeed. How significant, in your view, would a 50% tariff be for South Africa's vehicle market?
It would be incredibly significant. I think that this conversation is happening because the automotive market is under real pressure, both globally and locally. And you don't need an economics degree to feel that pressure. You just need to have shopped for a car recently. I'm sure you can agree. I mean, household budgets are tight, choices are narrowing, and people are counting their rands very carefully.
Indeed, Nicole. And I mean, you're right. Many people are out of pocket. They are counting their rents carefully. But what would this mean in real terms for car buyers, and how much more expensive could an importer's vehicle become?
Well, currently the South African government is reviewing the possibility of raising these import tariffs on vehicles from China and India specifically, from the current level of around 25% to as high as 50%. That is the maximum bound rate permitted under World Trade Organization rules. And really what that means to us is an impact on consumers. You know, it's a tariff change, yes, sure, but a tariff change can be a blunt instrument in the real world. You don't feel them in theory, you actually feel them in your installments every month. And when these prices move, families don't suddenly earn more proportionately, they just compromise more. So for many South Africans, a car is not just a status symbol, it's access, it's survival, it's how you get to work, it's how you get kids to school, it's how you keep life moving. And it's the South African consumer at the end of the day who will pay the price.
Indeed, Nicole. And which brings me to the next question. How dependent is South Africa currently on imported vehicles, especially those from China and India? I mean, we've been seeing a lot of Chinese brands on our roads.
Definitely. I mean, our data is showing us that buyers are already making much harder trade-offs than ever before. And that comes down to their vehicle purchase as well. They need to be very considered and very calculated when purchasing a vehicle. They also arrive at the purchase decision far more informed, much more price sensitive. And our research behavior shows a strong focus on the total cost of vehicle ownership. So our demand is now fragmented and there's no such thing as an average buyer. So we need to be very cautious about what this means to the buyer of a vehicle. And I think one of the key problems that we face is that it is not it's not as simple as a tariff conversation. We're hoping that local assembly and deeper localization, rather than punitive tariffs, offers a more sustainable path to industry growth.
Yeah. And Nicole, how might dealerships that rely heavily on imported models be affected? And do you think that and maybe this are two questions. Do you believe that maybe the solution could be that, let's say, these Chinese companies come and build plants here in the country?
Definitely. So there's a lot of positive outcomes that can come from these conversations. And I'm hoping that this is the start of many conversations. I definitely don't think that there's one fits-all solution, and it is not a simple conversation at that. However, our dealers do face the odds when it comes to this, because they need to now consider how their vehicle tariffs and vehicle prices will change. Just because you are now being charged a lot more for a vehicle in a certain category does not mean you're now suddenly going to buy a local vehicles. The tariffs do not immediately solve the problem, although they are sparking a conversation that is important to increase localization of manufacture of vehicles. And we've already seen we've got a lot more semi-knockdown arrangements in South Africa. And there is scope to encourage a transition towards completely knockdown manufacturing. And this is where we're completely building Chinese and assembling Chinese vehicles locally. And it's creating a lot more jobs in our South African market. And the real question is, at what cost does this process come to the consumer? And how do we introduce this sustainably in South Africa?
At what cost, indeed. But what are some of the trends, Nicole, has Cars.coza noted in the demand for imported vehicles over the past few years?
Well, we've seen a real shift, right, to purchase of Chinese manufactured vehicles. And simply because they come in at a incredibly reasonable price point for all the features that it gives you. And the landscape has shifted completely. I mean, 5 years ago, we would really question, what new brand this was, whether there would be parts availability, whether it would be reliable. And now these are all the things that become secondary conversations to the primary conversation of price point, features for that price point. And it becomes a much more viable option for buyers when looking at a new vehicle.
Yeah, Nicole, I can tell you now that it's going to be interesting to see whether or not these tariffs will slow down innovation and the introduction of new models into the market, such as the new electricity vehicles. But thank you so very much for indeed making the time.
Of course. Thank you for starting this important conversation. I guess the real question is how South Africa grows its automotive industry sustainably, right?
Indeed. That conversation brings us to exactly 16:30 Central African time. All right, now we're going to move to the world of business.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Innocent. A look at your markets this hour. $1 is trading at 16 rands 7 cents in South Africa. In Botswana, it's trading 12.99. In Namibia, it is trading at 16 Namibian dollars 7. The Zambian kwacha is trading at 19 kwacha 70 to the US dollar. In Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 45. In Ethiopia, it is trading at 156 birr 20. In Uganda, it is trading at 3,000 shilling 558, while in Tanzania, it is trading at 2,000 shilling 574. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 386. In Egypt, the dollar is trading at 46 Egyptian pound 92. In Tunisia, it is trading at 2 dinar 83. In Algeria, it is trading at 128 dinar 9. In Morocco, the dollar is trading at 8 dirham 98. In Angola, the dollar is trading at 912 kwanza, while the Congolese franc is trading at 2,250 to the US dollar. A look at your commodities. The gold is trading at $4,710 and platinum at $2,152 per ounce, while the price of Brent crude oil is at $66.18 a barrel. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business News, I am Matapela Mahape.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Matabelo. Let's look at what's happening in the world of sport with Mosebudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you so much, Innocent. A very good afternoon from the Sports Day. So, Rennes defender Jeremy Jacquet is said to have a medical at Liverpool before finalising a potential $75 million move to Anfield. But the centre half will not be joining the club in the current transfer window. So if the transfer is completed, the 20-year-old will switch to the Reds in the European summer after the club's reached an agreement on a $65 million plus $8 million in add-ons. The France under-21 international would sign a 5-year deal until the summer of 2031 with the option of a further year. Meanwhile, Chelsea are known to have also held talks with Jacquet during the winter window, but it's understood they did not match Liverpool's bid. Liverpool, by the way, are looking to bolster their centre-back positions with a France defender Ibrahima Konate's current contract set to expire at the end of the current season. Meanwhile, Celtic have rejected a bid of $27 million from Nottingham Forest for Belgium midfielder, that is Arne Engels. Now, Forest failed with the initial $20 million offer for the 22-year-old and then had a second bid of $22 million also turned down. Now, Engels joined Celtic for $18 million from German club Augsburg in August of 2024. He has also played 89 times in all competitions for the Glasgow club and helped them win the Scottish Premiership as well as the League Cup just last season. On to this story now. The NFL plans to return to the Santiago Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid for the regular season game in 2026 as part of a multi-year deal, it said on Monday, continuing the league's growing commitment to international expansion. Now, sources have confirmed that the deal also includes a match in 2027 at the venue, which is yet to be officially announced. The multi-year commitment to matches in Madrid, a world-class cultural as well as sporting destination, underscores the commitment of this market. That's according to Rafa de Los Santos, who's the director of NFL in Spain, having said this in a statement earlier on today. Now, the venue, home to soccer giants Real Madrid, hosted its first NFL game in November of 2025 when the Miami Dolphins defeated the Washington Commanders 16-13 in overtime. While looking to broaden its global footprint as well as attract untapped markets, the NFL plans to expand its international fixtures to 9 games in 2026, with matches confirmed in Melbourne, Rio de Janeiro, Mexico City, Munich, London as well as now Madrid. The league aims to grow its presence in new regions, with Australia set to host its first game in Melbourne, featuring Los Angeles Rams as the designated home team. The league also committed to hosting 3 regular season games over 5 years at Rio de Janeiro's Maracana Stadium, beginning in 2026. Now, since 2013, the Jacksonville Jaguars have played an annual home game in London, excluding 2020 under a separate agreement with the UK beyond the NFL's main international series. Now, NFL owners voted in December of 2024 to increase the number of overseas games, with Commissioner Roger Goodell expressing a desire for up to 16 international fixtures annually for the near future. And finally, onto this story. The African Beach Soccer Union recently hosted its annual general meeting in January. The continental mother body of sport reviewed the last season and previewed this year's calendar. Financial status is always a critical subject on the agenda. AB Masondo, who is the president of ABSU, has more on the state of the union's finances and also the proposed budget for the 2026-2027 season. Apologies there, we seem to not have that sound at this moment. Well, that concludes your sports news this hour. It's 16:37 p.m. Central African Time. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, do remember to send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or give us a call. The newsroom line is +27 11714 4459. There'll be more sporting updates tomorrow morning on Africa Rise and Shine. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. The voice of the continent. Now online. With all your sports fixtures, lifestyle, and more.
Well, a very big thank you to the sports desk. On this story now, South Africa's small businesses are heading into 2026 with a more favorable environment aiding their growth than the year before. Economic indicators point to an improved environment overall, with lower interest rates environment and softer inflation among other green shoots. However, business funders warn businesses owners not to rush blindly into expansion, but to prepare carefully. SABC's news reporter Diabo Sito reports.
South Africa heads into 2026 on a better economic footing than in recent years. The macroeconomic indicators show modest growth prospects, which experts say should be positive for the country's small business sector.
It's been quite positive from some of the economic indicators, such as inflation, which has remained within more or less the inflation target. The rand has strengthened quite significantly over the last few days. Interest rates have come down. We take another decision today as to whether that comes down. Still divided views. GDP growth forecasts are positive, somewhere between 1.4 to 1.6% for 2026, which I think is a good step forward. And obviously, the removal from the grey list also opens up avenues for more foreign direct investment and just opens up the the environment for more infrastructural development, which will impact SMEs quite substantially. Why? Because further down that supply chain, SME services, goods and services get used and so on. So I think it will be a better year for SMEs.
Vinesh Subramani, the interim managing executive of SME business at ABSA Business Banking, notes the bank's small business growth index that shows that around 59% of small businesses anticipate moderate to strong growth over the next 12 months. Surveyed respondents see growth intentions are largely domestic, with 92% planning to expand locally and 72% nationally, while a smaller but notable share is looking outward, with 45% intending to export and 67% aiming to grow their online presence.
And what we can see is that on the back of these green shoots that we're talking about, from an economic perspective, SMEs are also feeling more confident now about the future. But they have gone from, a couple of years ago where they were quite conservative, now to a place of what we're calling cautious optimism. So they're optimistic, but they're still cautious about, what they're going to do going forward. But overall, we've seen that, the confidence has improved. What this tells us is that we can't take for granted that they're going to thrive. As institutions, as policymakers, as financial partners, we still have a role to play in supporting SMEs with this cautious, optimistic outlook that they have.
But with load shedding easing, the lenders warn that water is fast becoming the next big operational threat. Chief Risk Officer at Lula, Garth Rossiter, says any serious disruption has a massive knock-on effect onto business.
In terms of the water, that's a massive issue. Obviously, we've dealt with power problems, but you can live without power for a little while. It's going to impact your margins. Lack of water really could result in some serious disruption to communities in general. And I think that for me that has massive knock-on effects to the businesses. The inability to access water is a disaster. So it's something that really needs to be addressed. We've been through this cycle a number of times. I think it's just really important that we start planning for these events. We are in a water-scarce country. We go through wet periods and we forget about it. So I think we really need to start planning as a government and providing basic infrastructure, building more capacity over time.
All right. Against the backdrop of the World Economic Forum, there is a global push to meet unprecedented electricity demand. Electricity has emerged as the defining infrastructure at the 21st century as industry, digital services, and emerging technologies electrify. Power systems are experiencing their internet moment, shifting from centralized one-way structures to dynamic, decentralized networks. Countries that secure abundant, reliable, and sustainable electricity today will gain a decisive economic advantage tomorrow. Moreover, this growth can accelerate efforts to reduce carbon intensity across the global power system. For more on this, we're joined on the line by Tabi, CEO of Grenville Energy. Tabi, a very good afternoon to you and welcome to Channel Africa.
Hi, good afternoon.
Indeed. How does your company see the future of global power systems over the next decade? And how does power systems innovation look like in Africa?
Global power systems, especially from an African context, will take shape around taking access to where it's needed the most. Last year, the World Bank and AFDB announced Mission 300, which in essence was to highlight the focus around 300 million people out of 600 million people in Africa who do not have access to electricity. So for us, the future is decentralized energy, decentralized electricity production, where it is needed the most, while we look at connecting all of those decentralized assets to build a resilient and scalable grid for the country.
And Tabi, how do you then view the role of smart grids in future power systems and the digital technologies, that are being implemented to optimize electricity generation and distribution?
Well, that's where innovation comes in. We see smart grid as the future because, number one, we have advancement in technology, in communications systems that will enable us to be able to use decentralized grids, make them smart with advanced technology like AI and obviously telecommunication systems. But then also designed for specific community needs. The challenge that you have with traditional grid is that they're designed for large-scale economic model, but then once taken into an environment where the economic model does not meet, for instance, high-density, low-income community, or low-density but high-income community like farming communities, the end user, the consumer, actually pays a higher bill for that. So with smart grid, we will be able to bring down the cost and increase access.
So, what role, can private sector developers play in strengthening national grids and countries? And we have seen here in the country, here in South Africa, where there was some sort of partnership between private sector and public sector in terms of dealing with the burden of electricity demand. What role can private sector developers play in this sense?
Well, you've mentioned our own case in South Africa, where during COVID, we had major blackout, and the intervention of the president to reduce barrier to entry and reduce the regulatory challenges made it easier for the private sector to step up and generate enormous amount of capacity using renewable energy resources like wind and solar, which obviously help us to stabilize the grid and to bring down cost. So the role that private sector can play, as we've seen, through mini grid development, through independent power producers, private companies can raise private capital and build assets that it can provide as independent power producers to supplement the generation capacity of the national carrier. And in some cases, these mini grid developers might be the only energy or electricity service provider. I mean, we see that in Nigeria, we see that in other East African countries. And we believe as Granville, that is the role that private sector should play. We bring innovation, we bring private capital, but also we bring access to where government entities cannot reach.
And Tabi, you and I can agree that there are external shocks, obstacles that might hinder us achieving this. And what are the biggest technical or financial challenges do you anticipate in transforming, Africa's power system?
I think we don't have as much as technical challenges, more regulatory and financial. In some countries, we don't even have regulatory framework around mini grid development or access to mini grid resources. And obviously, when entrepreneurs find opportunity to build mini grid for communities, they need access to funding. And most of the time, existing financial instruments are not designed to support mini grid developers. And that is where we see great opportunity. World Bank, AFDB, and other foreign DFIs are making huge contribution. But we need local participation as well. We need local financial institutions to get involved within the country and within the region as well to support these entrepreneurs.
You're saying the challenge is policy here. Do you perhaps see a bit of commitment from African governments in equally dealing with this challenge?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point you raise. We have seen governments leading right now, especially, let's use Nigeria as a case in point. The Nigerian government, through the Rural Electrification Agency, have been leading, in terms of innovation and models how to support rural electrification, but not just rural, also in urban areas, to the point where they actually have state-level participation with local companies as well as local regulators, and they provide a framework right down to tariff structure and standardization of equipment.
So, in other words, you would say we can put Nigeria as a case study in this sense?
Absolutely. Nigeria is leading right now.
So, but before I let you go, and talk to us then about the future of Greenville Energy. Where do you see yourself? Are you seeing yourself penetrating the African continent, and do you have a strategy in terms of doing that?
Absolutely. Last year, we established presence in 3 African countries. And as of this year, we've developed about $2 billion in project pipeline. And we have just expanded to the new market in Africa. Our focus is Africa. In 10 years' time, we believe we would have over 10 gigawatt of fleet to manage across the continent.
All right. Tabi, CEO of Greenville Energy. Thank you so very much for making the time.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it. That was Tabi CEO of Grenville Energy, talking to us about the future of electricity in the continent.
Je, una jambo lolote akilini mwako? Je, una shauku kuhusu masuala muhimu? Na je, una maoni ambayo unataka yasikike? Kweli, hili jukwaa ni la kwako. Piga simu au tuandikie kwenda WhatsApp namba alama ya kujumulisha 2760552594 na tutakupigia simu.
Mtangazaji wa habari zetu za Afrika Kusini mjini Johannesburg.
Hivyo unaweza kuwa mshirika kwenye matangazo yetu. Sio mazungumzo tu, ni fursa yako ya kuchangia maoni yako na kushirikiana na jumuiya ya wasikilizaji wanaotamani mtazamo wako. Tufuate kwenye mitandao ya kijamii. Tembelea tovuti yetu www.channelafrica.co.za na uwe tayari kushiriki na kuchangia maoni yako kwenye Channel Africa. Channel Africa, mtazamo wa Kiafrika.
African enterprise meets global opportunity. Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
Coming up next is Vood Afrique with Joël. Colleague, good afternoon to you.
Bonjour Innocent, ça va?
Ça va bien. What can you expect in the show?
Bonjour à tous les auditeurs. Alors, sur Vue d'Afrique, aujourd'hui, il sera question de la classe politique congolaise, qui est très divisée autour des conditions posées par le président de la République congolaise, de la République démocratique du Congo, pour la tenue d'un dialogue inclusif. Et nous parlerons aussi de la poursuite de la grève des enseignants au Gabon, malgré la signature d'un accord de sortie de crise. Et aussi au Soudan, l'aéroport international de Khartoum a accueilli dimanche son premier vol commercial de passagers depuis le déclenchement de la guerre en avril 2023. C'est tout à l'heure sur Vue d'Afrique. Merci Innocent.
Merci. She's up next with Vood Afrique. Please, it's going to be interesting. I didn't hear what she said, but I can tell you now that it's a jam-packed show.
From markets to innovation, Africa in Business with Tami Ngubeni covers it all. With Africa's future in focus, Channel Africa, the African perspective.
All right, in this week's F&B slot, South Africa's Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, is coming out later today. We will also be on the look for data on electricity production for the month of January, and that's coming on Friday. Now, the data on the Southern African Nations Exchange Reserves will be released. For more on this, we're joined on the line by Chief Economist at F&B, Tanda Sitole. Tanda, good afternoon to you and welcome to Channel Africa.
Good afternoon, sir. Hey, can I correct the title there? You've just promoted me to Chief Economist. I'm not yet a Chief Economist.
Okay.
I'm just a senior economist. Yeah.
It means we're manifesting it. It's coming. Now, Sitole, then talk to us about, with manufacturing PMI coming out later today. It fell in December. Are we likely to see the trend continue?
It has actually come out already. It came out around 10, 11 this morning. The outcome was largely in line with what we had expected. So in December, the PMI was around 40.5 index points, but we saw a jump in January of about 8.2 points to around to just near 50 index point, and that was largely driven by all sub indices of the PMI, except where we saw a modest 2.5 points moderation in expected business conditions, but still it was elevated at about 66 index points, suggesting that manufacturers, even in January, were still optimistic about near-term operating conditions. On other sub-indices, we saw a huge jump on business activity index, which is a proxy for supply or production. So that one jumped to over 50%. It's currently sitting at 51 index points, which is an expansionary phase, suggesting that production likely increased again in January. And we also saw some strong increase also in the demand sub-index, which is the new sales orders index, largely driven by domestic demand as opposed to the external environment. The BR survey results noted that export orders actually declined. So it was purely driven by domestic demand as opposed to the external environment. And we also saw some increase in inventories as well as employment. So generally, the print was good, and I think it marked a good start into 2025. We hope that actual production is still going to show signs of recovery this year going forward.
Yeah, that's encouraging news. And earlier we're talking about concerns that are being raised by the Automobile Association about the proposed 50% tariffs on cars imported from China and India. And which brings me to the next question about, the vehicle sales, which you have rightly indicated that were released this morning. For January, are we going to see any jump in those figures? And what does it say about the health of the consumer?
Yeah. So the vehicle sales numbers also looked decent in January. So they were out this afternoon around 2 o'clock. The growth there was around 7.5% year on year. So with units rising to nearly 50,000, to just above 50,000 when it comes to total new car sales. But what is important to note there is that the growth rate actually significantly moderated from double-digit growth from around 20% or so, particularly for passenger car sales, to something around 7%. So it was in line with our view also that while we think that demand for new car sales will be supported by favorable macro fundamentals, the rate of growth is likely going to taper off. So we're going to move away. We've already done that in January from double-digit growth, which we saw last year, to around single-digit growth this year and maybe even going forward. I think that broadly, fundamentals remain, domestic macroeconomic fundamentals remain supportive. If you look at inflation, it's low and stable, around 3%. We've got also growth momentum that is expected to persist. Despite the Reserve Bank holding interest rates unchanged last week, we think that there is scope for the Reserve Bank to cut even further by about 25 basis points this year. So those fundamentals are still going to be supportive of the sector, but we think that most of it already played out last year. So the rate of growth is likely going to moderate compared to what we've seen for the most part of last year.
Tell you what, Sithole, these are very much encouraging news. But let's talk about electricity production. What trends are we seeing when it comes to production?
Yeah. So production was weak, I think. So the data that is going to come out later this week is for December. The November print shows that production declined both on a year-on-year basis and on a month-on-month basis. But we're really not that much concerned about that, because if we look at where South Africa is now, we have transitioned from a period where we were extremely concerned about load shedding to a period where we are today, where we can say we are compatible with electricity supply. So it could be a correction from the strong growth that we saw last year, but we're really not concerned about it. I think what could play out is that if you look at the 3 months to November, seasonal adjusted electricity production showed a decline of about just over 2%, which suggests that if December data comes out and it shows continued weakness, the electricity sector might have been a threat to GDP growth in the fourth quarter, but we don't think that it will disrupt the growth momentum that we've seen from a GDP perspective. So we still forecast GDP growth of around 0.3% quarter-on-quarter for the fourth quarter. And we think that while growth averaged around 1.3% last year, it could still increase again this year to around 1.5% and closer to 2% by 2028 or so.
Right.
So broadly, the macro momentum or the GDP growth momentum is expected to persist over the focus period.
Indeed. On Friday, we'll get data on South Africa's gross foreign exchange reserves. We'll wait to see whether or not we'll be likely to see an improvement given the gold that is rallying off late. Thank you so much for indeed making the time, Thanda Sithole.
Thank you so much for having me.
There you have it. That was Thanda Sithole, economist at FNB. Well, that's my lot on this installment of Africa in Business. Let's do this again tomorrow, same time, same place. From myself, Innocent Semosa, on behalf of the team, it's goodbye and God bless.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet.